Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Bench Podcast presented to you by Anchor. I'm Aaron Valentino. Alongside me today are Jacob Johnson and Brandon Ladd, as always. And guys, we haven't done a three-person episode in quite some time.
Yeah, it'll be good to get back to it. We're gonna talk some NFL here, some NASCAR. Get back into that, and it should be a good episode with us.
Yeah, it's definitely overdue. We have millionaires with guns robbing banks. It's stuff we need to talk about.
Absolutely. But the first thing up on our agenda, as always, the whole reason we started this podcast is that sports are on pause right now. And Governor Cuomo made some comments this week saying that, guys, he wants to watch the Bills. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm a tad bit upset that he'd rather watch the Bills than the Giants, but that doesn't surprise me at all. We'll leave it at that. But it's good to hear that he wants to get sports back. He wants to start opening things. And I listened to it. He said, we want to get sports back. We want to work with those teams, but at the same time, we want to do it safely. We don't want fans yet. We want to do it in a timely manner that makes sense. So far, New York has done a diligent job with what they're doing with sports. But he wants to get that back, and then soon enough, it's going to have to be the cities that are going to want to get back. Like, you're going to want Yankee Stadium and Citi Field. Those two things are going to be huge for baseball season to come around. So it'll just be interesting how this progresses throughout the next couple of weeks in this pandemic.
Yeah, I have two things here. Number one, I'm shocked he's a Bills fan, seeing that all of his roots are in Queens and New York City. So I have no clue how he's a Bills fan. I have three things then. Two, Bills don't play till September, so I'm a bit confused why he skipped over.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say as well.
Three, everything's starting to reopen here, and the track's coming back. It's just, I'm still confused why he wants to watch the Bills in an empty stadium when there's about 47 options before then. But it's fine. Sports are coming back in New York. That's great.
Yeah, no, he said, he wants to work with the teams. He wants to get the sports teams back. And a lot of people across the nation are hoping sports comes back soon. But, guys, something we've kind of touched on a little bit is, he seemed adamant about he doesn't want fans in the stadium, Brandon. And that's definitely an interesting dynamic because, how much of a home field advantage is there if there are no fans in the stadium?
It's going to be interesting because no fans, there's certain sports that are going to work, like baseball. I don't see a need for fans. I feel like that's a very even playing field with no fans. But football, there's teams that are used to a lot of crowd noise, and that's their strategy to winning. We're going to talk about that when we get closer to the fall with college football because that's the one sport where crowd noise makes the biggest impact. But it's going to be eerie. Like, I wonder how much they're going to allow teams to pump noise into stadiums eventually. And if one state's allowing fans, these big 80,000 person stadiums, you could have 20,000 fans in some of these states. And I wouldn't be surprised if Texas and Florida and these more Republican states allow 25,000 fans in a football stadium. But is that fair to the teams that have zero fans in New York, California, New Jersey? So that's something we're going to have to talk about.
Yeah, and, I completely agree with that. Like, NFL needs that noise because, you see at Arrowhead Stadium, they have a Guinness World Record for loudest stadium, the 12th man in Seattle. Those two stadiums really feed off that fan noise, and the players know that. I would kind of disagree that MLB doesn't affect it. Just like thinking back to the Braves and they have the chop, that definitely gets into some pitchers' heads. But I think that football definitely has a bigger impact than baseball does. NASCAR, you really, you can't tell. They had the race on Sunday at Darlington, and there was no fans there, and you really couldn't tell. But some of these sports do really rely on that, so it'll be interesting to see by the time September comes around, do we have a vaccine? Is things lightening up? These are all things to look at. So I think Governor Cuomo, he took the right stance by saying no fans as of now. But I think he's going to have to backpedal on that in a couple weeks, maybe even a month or two, that if this dies down, you're going to have to be able to put fans in the stadium. The economy needs that. I've been talking to my dad, and he's been saying, I don't know how these teams or sports are gonna figure this out, because a lot of their revenue is based off of ticket sales and merchandise and, food sales at the stadium. So when these things are not being, no one's coming to the games, no one's buying anything, how that affects the economy in a real tough way. And we don't realize it, but the NFL is one of the leading money getters in the United States.
Yeah, Adam Schefter, went on the Woj pod a few weeks ago. It's a Woj pod with, Adrian Wojnarowski, Adam Schefter, and Jeff Passion, all the ESPN insiders. And Adam Schefter was saying he was talking to an owner, and the owner said to him, listen, people know obviously there's money that is lost. People don't know how much money is actually going to be lost in all this. And Lad, to your point, that's a really interesting thought that, maybe some stadiums, depending on the state you're in, some states are going to be more open than others. New York and New Jersey in particular are the worst in the country. Some stadiums might be able to have fans, and then the New York Mets and New York Yankees, I say baseball just because that's the closest season right now, they could be playing their home games without fans, while the Braves in Georgia's an open state, they could have some fans entering their stadium. Jake, what are your thoughts on maybe the league should kind of maybe say, all right, no fans for all teams just to keep everybody safe and keep it on an even playing field? Or is it kind of just a free-for-all? Whatever the state decides, the state decides.
Well, I'm going to give you two answers here. The first one is what I think should be done, and I think that it should be even playing fields. I think that if the Braves can have fans in their stadiums, but the Yankees can't, then that's not right, and that definitely gives a greater advantage to the Braves. So in that case, you have to be able to say, I don't think we can have any fans at all in any of these stadiums. But what I think that's going to end up happening is I think that these states that are open are going to allow a limited amount. But the question is, does the MLB allow that? Because I think the MLB has the power to say you can't let fans into your stadium. So I think that that's something that the MLB is going to do, and it's not really certainly going to be up to the states. I think it's going to be more the MLB is going to say, all right, I don't care if the Braves could fit 20,000 right now and that still adheres to the safety laws and the Yankees can't put anybody in their stadium. I think that the MLB is going to say we can't have any fans in the stadium until at least the government says we have a vaccine. You guys can go back to normal. You can have as many fans as you want in your stadium. But I think that's a long time coming.
Yeah. And Jake, it's interesting because baseball is a sport where they don't share the revenue. And I was wilding on Twitter the other night because I saw something where each game they don't play in front of fans. On average, you lose $640,000 per game. I did the math, 15 times 82, that's like $1,250. If you do that math, MLB is going to lose $787 million this year. But if the Braves make $20 million and the Mets and Yankees lose $150 million because this isn't even, how do you share this? Like, baseball doesn't have salary cap. It isn't prorated. It isn't revenue caps. It isn't hard caps and all that stuff like NBA and NFL. So is it just too bad you're in a bad state, you lose all your money? Or is it we're going to be fair and share the revenue? Or I like your idea, Jake, just put a hard stance on it, no fans anywhere, even if it makes sense in some areas.
And, the thing about that is if MLB does decide, Rob Manfred and company decide that there's going to be no fans, I mean, that decision makes sense on a lot of levels. They could just flat out say, hey, we don't want to be responsible, for people getting this virus. So we're just going to say no fans until, every state opens up completely and every state can have fans. It's definitely an interesting discussion, and I'm really, excited to see where that conversation goes in the coming weeks. But it's definitely exciting to see Governor Cuomo say he wants those, live sports to come back. And, some facilities are already opening. NFL training camps have opened up. The Marlins camp kind of reopened today. Some pitchers were throwing off a mound today. So all exciting stuff, guys.
Yeah, it's great to see that we're finally taking, a turn for the better. There's still a lot of work to be done, but the NFL training camps are opening. The Marlins were able to open. Some of these states that have less laws right now and are safer to be in, they're going to start being able to open. And I was listening to an interview with the Giants head coach, Joe Judge. And, you know, at the time, Governor Cuomo hadn't said whether they were going to open the state more yet, if it was going to be phase 1 yet. But, you know, luckily today we've got to that. But he had said if we didn't get to that point, we were going to try and look for another location to start doing our training camp, a safer state. And one of the ones that he had said was Florida. And he and the Dolphins, Brian Flores, were talking and saying maybe they could do a joint, practice facility where they split it in half and then they each get their own work. But it's looking like since Governor Cuomo said that, the Giants can be able to practice in their own facility.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating. We're making progress. As Governor Cuomo always says, the American people and New Yorkers control their own destiny. It's shown this. MLB can follow these rules. All these different sports can follow these rules, reopen, because if you take the proper precautions, you're going to prevent the spread of the disease, and that's all that matters. So there's smart ways to do this, and we're finding that out.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to be fun to see. Hopefully sports are back soon. It's definitely a positive sign this week. But moving on to something that has been kind of getting everybody through sports recently is The Last Dance, finally wrapped up on Sunday. Jake, I got to ask you before I ask my first question here. Did you watch the final 2 episodes?
I did not get a chance yet, but it's coming. I kind of felt I don't really want to watch the last 2 because then it's over. But at the same time, it's like I got to see what happens. I haven't had too much time on my hands these last few days, so I'm thinking maybe tonight or tomorrow night is going to be the chance I'll sit down and finally enjoy the last 2.
So, even though you haven't seen the last 2 episodes, Jake, Lad, what are your kind of final thoughts on this whole thing?
Well, I'm taking the unpopular stance that Phil Jackson's just this spin master. He's not the Zen master. I'm going to take Skip Bayless's term here and call, Jake, roll your eyes all you want.
Never take the Skip Bayless term.
So, going back to Phil Jackson here, they call him the Zen master, but he's the spin master. So, Aaron, I was talking to Neil about this last night on our discussion about The Last Dance. We see this as Jerry Krause's fault. We see it as Michael Jordan wasn't given the opportunity. But taking what Jerry Reinsdorf said, the owner of the Bulls, said at that end of the documentary, he offered Phil Jackson to come back. He overrode Jerry Krause. He would have had the opportunity to come back. He offered him a 1-year contract. Everyone would have been offered a 1-year contract, according to Reinsdorf. Phil Jackson's the one that turned it down. He's the one who had Jordan in the palm of his hands. And look, 2 years later, he's winning a championship with the Los Angeles Lakers and Kobe and Shaq, while Michael Jordan's sitting in retirement. So it's just something here where Jordan was so naive and he came off as this unwitting pawn in Phil Jackson's game.
That's an interesting take. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that because Scottie Pippen wanted to get paid. Now, I'm sure, as everybody else has said, Michael probably could have convinced Scottie to come back for another year. Whatever the deal was, hopefully more money than, what he was getting. But at that point, Krause and Jackson's relationship was so tarnished that I don't know, did Phil Jackson make the right decision? I think if you ask him, I think he would say yes. He went on to coach Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal and win 5 more championships with that. 5 more championships with them. I think Krause and Jackson's relationship was so tarnished at that point that Reinsdorf was going to either have to get rid of Krause in order to bring Jackson back. And, Krause was the one who built the whole team up. So Reinsdorf stuck with his guy. And obviously, as the documentary said, the Bulls began to rebuild.
Yeah. And I'm going to look at this as like just the fan perspective. Say I didn't know anything about basketball. It was fascinating to learn some of that stuff. A lot of it I had already known, growing up watching sports, but some of it blew me away, the stuff that I did not know. And it really filled that void that we were looking for. And I know ESPN is trying to work on other documentaries or 30 for 30s to keep sports fans occupied right now. I know they're coming out with a baseball one this summer. So they did a really good job with it. I know a lot of people have said since Jordan produced it, they didn't show all the bad things that he's done. But it was his documentary. He wanted to be seen how he wanted it. So I understand what he put out there. He didn't want the really bad things on there. He didn't want to tarnish his name that people knew was the greatest of all time. So it's just, I really liked it. Some people just need to be less greedy with what they're getting right now. It's a sports documentary. Enjoy it. You don't have to complain about everything. So I think that it was a great documentary and it really filled that void.
I think they did a great job. And, there were people like Horace Grant and Scottie Pippen who later came out when the documentary was over and made some comments saying that the whole story wasn't necessarily told. Listen, two things. One, Jordan helped produce the documentary. So they're not, while he doesn't look great in this, and I watched 2 of the episodes with my aunt who really didn't know a lot about sports. Obviously, she knew who Michael Jordan was, but she didn't know that he was as rude or as big as a bully as he was on the court. He didn't look great, but he didn't look as bad as he could have. And with Jordan and Jump 23 producing a good part of the documentary, there's only so much you can get. There's some give and take with this too. ESPN wasn't going to slander Michael Jordan completely, especially when they sat him down for 3 or 4 days and interviewed him on everything throughout his entire career. Michael Jordan, in a sense, still has a big part in ESPN. He owns an NBA team. ESPN broadcasts games where he has advertisements with ESPN. So there are a lot of different factors that go into that. They weren't going to completely slander Jordan throughout all of this, lad.
Yeah, you're completely right. And I think of other documentaries and probably documentaries to come. ESPN's never going to slander LeBron James. ESPN's never going to slander Derek Jeter or players like this. I just watched a Barack Obama documentary for Michael Ruddy's class for political science. God bless the man. And they didn't slander Obama, and they didn't show everything, because when you do a documentary, you're not going to show everything. You're going to show the more positive moments. So this whole Michael Jordan thing, we see them pulling his dead father's body out of a creek in North Carolina. Like, how much more graphic and devastating for Jordan do you need to get? We talk about his gambling problems. We talk about them trying to run him out of the NBA. It's been talked about the 18-month suspension. This is all hysteria and controversy and theories that aren't proven, and Jordan still put them in there. So I don't like when people say, oh, this is a so-called documentary. Every documentary is that way. It's the narrative of the director. That's all it is.
Yeah, and I think a lot of documentaries are like that. You're not going to put your name out there. You're not going to take all this time just to have your name slandered. Why would you do that? So I think that it was a good documentary. I think that Jordan did a great job with it. I think that the interviews were really interesting. I think that some of the clips were really interesting, never before seen footage. And, I think ESPN did a great job, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. We saw on Instagram that they had said something about they captured all of Kobe Bryant's final season in the NBA. There's probably going to be a LeBron James one in the making. I'm sure there's going to be a Yankees one. And they've been saying on ESPN, what documentary should we make next? Which ones do you want to see? Maybe we'll see one about the 73-9 Warriors team. So there's a lot of things to come. I guess it just takes time. And if people want to see it, ESPN will put it together.
And, one final question about this, really, and, when the first 2 episodes came out, everybody on Twitter went crazy, like, oh, Jerry Krause is an idiot. Jerry Krause and Carol Baskins are the 2 most hated people in America right now. Is Krause the villain in this story? Because the director of the documentary went on SVP and basically said one of the mistakes he felt like he made in the documentary was he felt like he was too hard on Jerry Krause. Jerry Krause was taking abuse throughout the entire, Bulls dynasty, really, from Jordan or Scottie or whoever. And he said, he really couldn't – it was really hard for him to create Krause's image without being able to interview Krause. He only had, the limited footage that he had. So, Jake, is Krause the villain in this story?
Yeah, and I said that from the second episode, the second or third, when they really dug deep into him. I think that he really managed the Bulls in a bad way. He had all these star players, and he just pushed them away with his stupid comments. And I remember one time, it was after they won the championship, he gave credit to himself. Like, you weren't on the court doing all that. You weren't the one playing. You really did a shitty job. It was just – I think that he deserves all the slander that he's getting. I wouldn't put him above Carol Baskin right now, but he's definitely a close top 2 there.
Yeah, I wouldn't exactly put him above her quite yet. We're still looking for that body out in the field. Or it was fed to the Tigers. We're not sure quite yet.
In the meat grinder.
Yes, we're not sure where the body is quite yet. We're still looking. But we know where Jerry Krause's body is. And that is buried by this documentary. Absolutely buried. And I don't like that because there is no documentary. There's no three-peat and another three-peat without Jerry Krause. But there's no three-peat and another three-peat without Michael Jordan. So I'm conflicted because Jerry Krause wanted all the credit and wanted to show that he could do it without Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. But he couldn't. But this documentary also shows Michael Jordan couldn't do it without Jerry Krause and Scottie Pippen and all these players. So Jerry Krause had a good point. Great organizations win championships. His issue, though, was he thought he was the sole contributor to this organization, which he is not.
I think honestly the problem was it was two giant egos in Michael Jordan and Jerry Krause, really clashing. And at the end of the day, Jerry Krause is Michael Jordan's boss. No matter how powerful Jordan became by the end of his tenure with the Bulls, Jerry Krause is still Michael Jordan's boss. Jerry Krause is the one signing Michael Jordan's paychecks. So at the end of the day, Krause could have done whatever he wanted with the team, and he felt that, he wasn't going to be able to keep it up for long. So he felt it was time to kind of reset, do a hard reset on the Bulls, and that's what he went and did. And, it didn't really work out for the better. He was never able to get back to the point that he wanted to get to.
Yeah, and you have a good point, and I think we forget this in 90s history. Same thing happened to one of the greatest football dynasties of all time, the early 90s Cowboys. Jimmy Johnson was run out of town before they got into their groove by Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones said any coach in America could have won a Super Bowl with that roster. He took all the credit. That's how Jerry Krause felt. But I think it's unfair that these owners and GMs can do whatever they want and run people out. So it's kind of, you see now the players have taken back the power. You see LeBron, he controls every contract negotiation and every team he's on. KD's done it going to the Nets. We've seen it with the Warriors with these super teams. Players have taken that power back. Coaches have taken that power back. We saw with Phil Jackson only wanting to coach Kobe and coming back to the Lakers. So it seems like in the 90s, organizations had the power, but nowadays players have the power. So that's something that Michael Jordan seems naive because he just doesn't have the power of the modern day player. And it seems like he could have. He was a billionaire.
He created that power, essentially. He really was revolutionary throughout the 90s in getting certain things done. He was really, honestly, the assistant coach of that team. He really had so much power. Phil Jackson gave him, so much leeway on that team, Jake. And he killed it, but at the end of the day, he couldn't keep it going. He went for as long as he could.
I mean, to get back to the thing that, Lad was talking about with the Cowboys, I think that there's just one common denominator between the two, and it's a dick named Jerry. There's always that situation.
We gotta put that on a shirt. A
Jerry Krause, Jerry Jones. Like, yeah, that just seems to be an issue with people named Jerry. So I think that the Cowboys should have figured that out a long time ago when the Bulls did. It's just an idea.
That is an iconic quote that needs to live on forever. There's always a dick named Jerry. That's so great. But The Last Dance overall, incredible job by everybody involved. Just people be happy with it. There's no reason to hate on something that's good. There's no reason to at all. Great job by everybody involved, and I can't wait for the next one. Moving on, Jake, I have a question for you. Why are millionaires buying guns and robbing people?
I think they're bored. I think that they have nothing else to do right now. So they're like, you know what? Hey, Quentin Dunbar, come here. Do you want to rob these people at a barbecue with me? I know we're like millionaires and I just got drafted last year and I'm the cornerback for the New York Giants, but I feel like I want to rob somebody today. I think that's what goes through their head. I don't get it. You have a bright future. You're literally the first round draft pick by the Giants last year, and you're like, I want to go steal more money from people when I already make $5 million a year. What is wrong with you?
It must be these people must have been like, what is happening? Here comes this Mercedes-Benz down the street convertible. You just don't see it coming. Then next thing you know, is that an AK-15 in the trunk? Do these guys have guns? Are they holding the guns up in the air and saying, if you don't give us your $20, we're going to just shame you with our $4.5 million? Like, what are these people doing?
For those of you who aren't getting the reference, Deandre Baker and Quinton Dunbar were arrested for armed robbery, battery, and aggravated assault earlier this week. It's something. And I think the craziest part about this is Quinton Dunbar is on a Zoom meeting with Seahawks, beat reporters earlier that day and is saying all these things about how he's looking forward to the season, how, he has a great opportunity with the Seahawks. He doesn't want to do anything to mess that up. And later that night, he goes and robs someone at gunpoint. This is just really just a wild story, no matter how you look at it, Brandon.
Yeah, they're coming off as Amsterdam gangbangers, like 13-year-old kids, not 4.5 millionaires. Like, who holds someone to gunpoint at a barbecue? Like, we don't have all the details here, but what's going on with these people? Like, 20 years in prison compared to playing for the Seahawks? I get it with Deandre Baker. It's basically you're in a state correctional office already playing for the New York Giants. But come on.
The only – I can't even say the only positive. Innocent till proven guilty is the first thing I'm going to say because apparently –
Yeah, they're claiming it's not them, right?
Apparently the last few days so there was – the first one was two eyewitnesses were there to back up Quinton Dunbar saying that it wasn't him, that he wasn't involved. And now, this is a wild story you're about to hear. So, Deandre Baker, apparently he also has eyewitnesses saying that he was not involved. So, apparently, Deandre Baker brought his PlayStation over to the house to play Madden. And he brought his own console over. So, apparently, he was playing Madden when this happened, and he dipped. So they are going to look at the online log.
Yeah, that's great.
See if Deandre Baker was playing Madden at the time of the robbery to see if he's involved or not. That is, if that's not the wildest story you're going to hear in 2020, then I don't know what is.
Well, the coronavirus.
We're looking towards Madden. We are looking at Madden to see if a dude was the one that wanted to kill somebody else for money.
So this year's written by a kindergartner. I've seen all these memes. We have a virus that comes from a foreign land, takes over our lives. Everything is shut down. We sit in our houses. I look outside on May 8th, and we have 3 inches of snow outside. It was 82 degrees 2 days earlier. There's a tornado going through Saratoga Springs the other day. Quinton Dunbar and Deandre Baker are robbing people at gunpoint. People are pressing the button X on the Xbox before they pull their guns out to rob people. This is just, I don't know what to make of this year because who brings their Xbox to somebody else's house? That's the question I have, Jake.
He wanted to play Madden. I don't know.
I think the biggest thing of all of this is that, this isn't Joe Schmo, for the Giants, the 53rd man or the 53rd man for the Seahawks. Quinton Dunbar and Deandre Baker, they're going to start, or we're going to start this year. And both teams, Jake, are affected by this in some way. The Giants who, are trying to start a rebuild here a little bit, DeAndre Baker was one of those building blocks, a young building block, and they get a little bit set back by this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like our cornerbacks are top 10 in the NFL. We're down below in the 20s. And DeAndre Baker, he didn't have a great year last year, but he proved that he could play at a high level and that this year was going to be a big year for him. So putting him next to James Bradbury, the acquisition we got from Carolina, that was going to be a very solid cornerback group. And then with the safeties, Jabril Peppers and Xavier McKinney, that's a very good young group of safeties and cornerbacks. So it was really looking promising until DeAndre Baker got into this incident. So for the Giants, it looks like there are some still solid cornerbacks out there right now. I don't think we're going to end up picking one up. We have to see how this situation goes. Is he not convicted? Do they find him not guilty? I guess we'll have to see in the near future. But what I don't get right now is it's not just DeAndre Baker and Quinn Dunbar. We've seen Cody Latimer get arrested, the wide receiver formerly of the Giants, now of the Redskins. Ed Oliver got arrested for possession of a weapon and driving under the influence. Cody Latimer wanted to kill people in Colorado. Why are NFL players who make millions and millions of dollars all of a sudden wanting to kill people?
Well, there was a victim story that came out today. A unnamed NFL player said he was sexually assaulted by a female passenger on a United Airlines flight this week. So I am not sure what is happening to African-American athletes and NFL millionaires this week. I'm just not sure what is going on during this quarantine.
Something's in the water here. I don't know.
2020, crazy times, and crazy times are still ahead for sure. Sticking with the NFL, though, moving on now to the Rooney Rule. The NFL is proposing a rule that, if NFL teams hire minority coaches in any way, shape, or form on their coaching staff, they will be what is the word that I'm looking for? Compensated for hiring those picks, for hiring those coaches with, higher draft picks in the third or fourth round. And I don't really know what to make of this rule, Lad. We'll start with you.
It's one of the biggest insults to the African-American community ever. And as someone who is not a member of the African-American community, but is going to speak like Stephen A. Smith for the next minute here, I might as well run with it. This is such an insult because I get so frustrated that minority coaches are not hired in the NFL because you see it with Eric Bieniemy, you see it with different coordinators around the league. We have great minority coaches in a league that is 70% African-American players. It needs to be properly represented. And I don't say these rich white owners have a vendetta against these young African-American coordinators becoming head coaches because we've seen examples of minority coaches. And we see Ron Rivera getting hired 3 separate times. And we've seen stuff like that. But it's just frustrating that there isn't equal representation because there should be. But why would you insult people by giving compensation? Hey, if you do a favor for us, we're going to give you a 3rd-round pick. Like, that's just the biggest insult to me. People just need to get over themselves, open their eyes, and do fair due process and make the right talent coaching decisions, not based on color of skin or who knows who.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's ridiculous. This Rooney Rule is ridiculous. I understand we need more minority coaches in the NFL. But I personally don't think that owners in the NFL right now are saying, I'm not going to hire him because he's African-American. I really don't see that in the NFL, considering they're signing these huge free agents who are African-American. I don't think that they don't want their coaches to be it. It's who they think fits their scheme the best. We've seen African-American coaches being hired. Todd Bowles is one that was for the Jets, and he's bounced around on a couple teams. So I don't think giving somebody a better pick in the NFL draft just to hire an African-American coach is the right thing to do. I guess I can't speak for that because I'm not part of the African-American community. I'm not a minority. But if you're going to give a 3rd-round pick to somebody just because, oh, you hired an African-American head coach. Oh, you hired a African-American GM. I really don't think that should play a part in how good of a draft pick you get. It should be how you perform on the field, not off the field.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, for rebuilding teams who are looking to get extra picks, I mean, they could just hire whoever just to get the extra pick, and the tankathon, could be bigger than ever, and they could just be compensated just because they hired, somebody with a different color of skin. It's definitely a bizarre rule, and coming up with it is pretty wild. And you're right, lad. I do agree with you. I think it's kind of an insult to the African American community that saying that they wouldn't be able to get hired on their own. But it's also like the NFL doesn't trust their people to include everybody in this process. It just seems kind of like an insult to everybody, and I really just don't understand it. But we'll see what happens, moving forward with this rule. Moving on now to NASCAR, I'm gonna let you guys take over this conversation a little bit here. It was a pretty wild, first NASCAR race back, Jake.
Yeah, I was really hyped for the start of it. I was so excited. I was like, NASCAR is not my favorite sport, obviously. MLB is, but I'm a very big NASCAR fan. I love going to the races. So when I saw that it was coming back on Sunday at Darlington, which is, it's a really tough track to race at, and for them to start there, it was definitely a weird place to start at, but South Carolina is open, so it gave them the chance to do that. They didn't get any practice laps in. They didn't qualify. It was literally done by a draw of a hat on where everyone was going to start the race. Starting the race, you didn't really feel that there was no fans there. Pre-race, you could definitely tell there wasn't the crowd noise. Everyone during the national anthem was wearing their masks out of their car. It was the national anthem was sung by Darius Rucker, already pre-recorded. The Driver Start Your Engines was pre-recorded by a bunch of nurses from hospitals around the country. So that was really cool to see. And once they got to racing, you couldn't really tell. It was just a normal NASCAR race.
Yeah, it was just a normal NASCAR race once it started. And this is a sport where you do not need fans. It had Jake, I think you'd agree with me, it had a Monday afternoon, day after a rain out feel. So when a race gets rained out on Sunday in NASCAR, they always do it at 1 o'clock on Mondays, and usually it's 90% empty. So it kind of had that feel. But it was an interesting race. It was good to have it back. Kind of brought me back to my childhood. NASCAR was my first love with sports. It's kind of shocking now that it's way down the list, and I just dropped my pen. But it's one of those things where NASCAR was my first love, and from age about 9 to 14, I never missed a practice, qualifying, or race for all three series. Every weekend, Thursday through Sunday, I was so invested into NASCAR. And into high school with other sports like college football and NFL and all these things, and the Celtics and Yankees and blah, 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 I got driven away from NASCAR. So this was kind of interesting to me because it brought me back to my roots. I, for a couple hours, watched a NASCAR race, and it was good. Jimmy Johnson wrecked out of first place. Even Aaron Valentino said that usually doesn't happen, and I can agree with you. That usually does not happen when someone wrecks out of first place, which was interesting.
And Johnson, if I'm not mistaken, really was kind of one of the favorites to win the race. He's in third place. I forget, what lap or what stage it was, but he's in third place, and he just completely wrecks himself out of first place and doesn't get a top finish.
Yeah, I mean, it was really funny because there was a wreck on lap 1 of the race, and it was Ricky Stenhouse Jr. So if you're a NASCAR fan, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. wrecking is not a surprise. So when he wrecks, Lad texted me and goes, when Ricky Stenhouse Jr. wrecks, NASCAR's back. So he wrecks on the first lap of the race. Car hits the inside wall. And then I'm like, okay. And then they were pretty clean through the rest of the stage. There was the caution at lap 30. And then with about 1 lap to go, or 2 laps to go, Jimmy Johnson was coming up behind Chris Buescher and hit his backside, wrecked himself out of first place, and took himself out of contention, and that's not how he wanted to start. Luckily, they're going right back to Darlington tomorrow night. It was supposed to be tonight, but with rain, the Xfinity race was pushed to tonight, and then therefore the NASCAR race was pushed to the next day. So I can't wait to watch that race. I think it'll be a little different feel because they had already been on that track a week before. They're going to know how it is, but it's going to be a different time. It's going to be a little later in the day. So, track time is going to be a little different. But I'm really excited to get to watch it. And I don't know, Lad, have you ever been to a NASCAR race?
I have never been to a NASCAR race, so I don't have that expertise that you have.
So I'm thinking that if fans come back, we're going to have to hit up New Hampshire this summer.
We will have to hit up New Hampshire, one of the most progressive reopening Republican states there is in the land, New Hampshire.
And they love their NASCAR over there.
They do. What a great state if they reopen, and it lets me go to my first NASCAR race. We are pushing for that. Screw the virus. It will be over by – just kidding. I'm not going to say that because that will be bad.
You've been saying that a lot lately. Yesterday when I told you we were getting a second Comrex, you were like, oh, we got to get back up right now.
Just tell everyone it's the flu.
Yep.
That was my
Tell everyone it's the flu.
yesterday.
Tell everyone it's the flu. But everyone, that is going to do it for episode 8 of The Bench podcast presented to you by Anchor FM. You can check us out there. Link is going to be in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. You can also check us out on Spotify. Not on Apple quite yet, but everywhere else you get your podcast, you can listen to us there, Anchor and Spotify. Thank you, Jake and Lad, for joining me as always, and we are going to see you next week. Have a great rest of your quarantine week, everyone.